I used to think the worst kind of betrayal came from strangers, until my own sister proved me wrong. That's how my story begins, not with a fight, or a scandal splashed across the family group chat, but with a quiet sentence that broke something inside me. I was sitting at our kitchen table, sorting through old letters from Dad's office. He'd passed away a year before, and though the grief had dulled from a stabbing pain to a constant ache, there were days when a memory or a smell could undo me. That morning, it was the faint scent of his cologne on a stack of envelopes. "Old Spice and ink," I murmured, half smiling. My sister Marjorie had promised to help me go through his papers, but, like always, she was late. She had an easy way about her, the kind that made people forgive her too quickly. I used to be one of those people. When she finally arrived, breezing in with her coffee and bright scarf, I felt that familiar mix of affection and irritation. Sorry, she said, setting her cup down. Traffic was awful. I just nodded. It's okay. We're almost done with the main box. The morning sunlight pooled through the curtains, dust floating like tiny ghosts in the air. We worked in silence for a while, flipping through Dad's tidy handwriting, old bills, property records. Then, tucked between two folders, I found a sealed envelope. My name wasn't on it. Neither was hers. It just said, "For my wife." For a second, I thought it was for Mom, but the date on it was from just 3 years ago. Mom had been gone for 10. My heart skipped. "Marge," I said, holding up the letter. "What is this?" She looked up too quickly, too sharply. Her smile faltered, just for a second, before returning like a mask. "Oh, that? It's nothing. Dad probably kept some old draft from before Mom passed." But something in her tone made my skin prickle. I turned the envelope over. The handwriting was his, but the pen stroke was different, newer, firmer. 3 years ago? I asked quietly. He was still writing to someone? She sighed, avoiding my eyes. "Let's not make this a big thing, okay? Dad had friendships. You know how lonely he got after Mom." Her voice trembled ever so slightly, and that tremble told me everything she didn't. I didn't open the letter that day. Instead, I placed it aside and kept sorting, my hands steady but my heart loud in my chest. Back then, my life was steady in every other way. I was a school counselor, married to a kind man named Robert. We didn't have children, but our small world was peaceful. I spent my mornings helping students, my afternoons tending to the small garden Dad had planted behind our home. Marjorie lived 2 towns over, in the house Dad had helped her buy. We saw each other on weekends, always keeping up appearances, laughter over coffee, the occasional argument about who got what after the estate settlement. But now, that letter had changed something invisible between us. Every time she smiled, I wondered what she was hiding behind it. That week, I found myself thinking about Dad in a different light. About the nights he spent away after Mom died, saying he was visiting old friends. About the way Marjorie used to defend him when I questioned where he went. "You always overthink," she'd tell me. He's just trying to live a little again. But had she known more? One evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the unopened letter on my lap. Outside, rain streaked the glass, soft and rhythmic. I thought about how Dad used to tap his pen against the table when he wrote. Slow, deliberate, thoughtful. I could almost hear it. That rhythm always calmed me. But now it just echoed, like a warning. When I finally opened the envelope, my breath caught. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "To my beloved wife, thank you for giving me peace again. I wish my daughters could meet you, but Marjorie insists it's better this way. I trust her judgment. She's always been the brave one." The letter was signed, "With love, Arthur." And beneath it, a name I didn't recognize. Elaine. My hands went cold. Marjorie knew. The next morning I called her. "Who is Elaine?" I asked without preamble. Silence. Then, a soft sigh. "You weren't supposed to find that letter." My voice broke slightly. "So it's true. Dad remarried?" "Yes," she said finally, her tone flat. "He did. 3 years before he died." I sat down hard. The world tilted. "You helped him hide it?" "I didn't help, Clara. I just respected his wishes. He didn't want you to know. He thought it would hurt you." The absurdity of it made me laugh, bitter and hollow. So instead, you let me spend his funeral thinking Mom was his only love? Her silence said enough. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I just stared out the window, feeling something old and heavy shift inside me, as if all those years of sisterly trust had been built on sand. That night, I told Robert everything. He listened quietly, his hand resting over mine. Maybe she thought she was protecting you, he said gently. I shook my head. No, she was protecting herself. She always needed to be the one Dad trusted more. The favorite. Robert didn't argue. He just held my hand until the anger gave way to exhaustion. Still, sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marjorie standing beside Dad's coffin, crying the loudest, while keeping this secret locked behind those tears. The next morning, I decided I couldn't just let it rest. If Dad had remarried, I needed to know who she was, so I went digging. It started innocently. I looked through his old phone records, his email drafts. Then I checked public records, typing Arthur Matthews' marriage certificate into the search bar. My stomach twisted as the results appeared. 3 years ago, same town. And there it was. Arthur Matthews married Elaine Foster, no doubt. That night, I printed it out and stared at it under the kitchen light. My hands trembled. Elaine Foster. A name that suddenly carried weight, like the ghost of a woman who'd been living in our family's shadows. But the question that haunted me most wasn't who she was. It was why Marjorie had kept her hidden from me, because secrets that big don't stay buried without purpose. I didn't tell Marjorie what I'd found, not yet. Instead, I called in sick to work and drove to the address listed on the marriage certificate. It was a quiet street near the old harbor, the kind of place where you could live peacefully without ever drawing attention. The house was small, pale blue with white shutters, and there were hydrangeas blooming out front. My father had always loved hydrangeas. He used to trim ours himself every summer. For a long moment, I sat in the car, my fingers gripping the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to turn around and forget everything. But the other part, the one that had been lied to, couldn't walk away. So I got out. When the door opened, a woman in her late 50s appeared. She looked startled at first, then cautious. Yes, I swallowed hard. My name is Clara Matthews. I believe you knew my father, Arthur Matthews. Her face changed in an instant. A flicker of recognition, then sadness. You're Clara, she whispered. That single sentence nearly buckled my knees. She stepped aside and opened the door. You'd better come in. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon and old books. There were framed photographs on the mantel, and in one of them, my father stood beside her, smiling softly, his arm around her waist. I stared at it, speechless. He looked happy, not the tired, quiet man I'd known in his final years, but content. Elaine poured tea and sat across from me. I always hoped we'd meet, she said gently. Arthur talked about you often. I could barely breathe. He talked about me. Yet I never even knew you existed. Tears glimmered in her eyes. That wasn't your fault. He wanted to tell you. But your sister, she thought it would complicate things. She said you were fragile, that you were still grieving your mother. My chest tightened. She said that? Elaine nodded. He believed her. He didn't want to hurt you, so he kept quiet. I tried to convince him otherwise, but he was loyal to Marjorie's judgment. A bitter laugh escaped me. Of course he was. She's always been the golden child, the one who knows best. Elaine hesitated, then reached for a small box on the table. He left this for you. He made me promise to give it to you one day when the time was right. Inside the box was a photograph. Dad, Mom, Marjorie, and me, taken in our backyard when I was maybe 10. Tucked behind it was a folded letter. I unfolded it carefully. My dear Clara, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you myself. I never stopped loving your mother, but after years of loneliness, I met someone who gave me peace again. Please forgive me for finding happiness in another's company. I didn't mean to replace, only to survive. My tears fell freely then, splashing on the paper. Elaine reached out but didn't touch me. She seemed to understand that some pain needed space. I didn't want to hide, she said softly. I even came to his funeral, but Marjorie told me to stay in the car. She said people wouldn't understand. I looked up sharply. She what? She parked down the road. I sat there the whole time, watching from afar, my throat closed. The image of that, a woman sitting alone in a car, grieving silently while we mourned inside, shattered me. That night when I drove home, the world outside my windshield blurred. My mind replayed every moment with Marjorie over the past year. Her sudden tears when we sorted Dad's things, her insistence on handling the will, the way she'd snapped whenever I asked questions about his last days. She hadn't been protecting me. She'd been protecting her version of the truth. When I confronted her 2 days later, she didn't even deny it. We met at her house, the one Dad had helped her buy. Why? I asked simply. Marjorie's shoulders sagged, but her tone was defensive. Because you couldn't have handled it, Clara. You idolized Dad. You never saw his flaws. I was the one who picked up the pieces after Mom died. You just ran away. Her words hit like small, sharp stones. That doesn't give you the right to lie to me for years. She crossed her arms. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything. That is a lie. My voice cracked. You watched me grieve a version of Dad that wasn't even real. She flinched, but didn't back down. You think I didn't grieve? I loved him too, Clara. But I accepted that he needed someone. You wouldn't have. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to shake her until she understood what she'd done. But I didn't. Instead, I looked around her living room, the framed photos of her family, the soft light on her walls, the stability she'd built while I'd been left clutching pieces of the past. You kept him for yourself, I said quietly. You got to be the understanding daughter, the one who knew everything, and you let me mourn alone. Her eyes filled with tears then, not defensive ones this time, but something deeper. Maybe I did, she whispered. Maybe I just didn't want to share him again. After Mom, I was so scared of losing what little we had left. For the first time, I saw her not as the schemer I'd built up in my head, but as the little girl who used to crawl into Dad's study and fall asleep on his lap while he read. Still, it didn't erase the hurt. I met her, I said finally. Elaine, she's not the monster you imagined. She loved him, and she loved us enough to keep quiet. Marjorie looked away, her jaw tight. You shouldn't have gone. I had to, I said. Because you turned his truth into a lie, and I'm done pretending that's love. We stood there in silence, two grown women with too much history between us. Then she whispered, I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. Not yet, but it was something. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Dad's letter, about how he just wanted peace. And here we were, his daughters, at war over his memory. For the first time, I wondered if maybe the person I was really angry at wasn't Marjorie or even Elaine, but Dad himself, for leaving us to clean up the silence he'd created. But grief is messy that way. It doesn't stick to one target. I decided I needed to go back, to Elaine's house, one more time. There were questions still burning at the edges of my heart and answers only she could give. When I pulled up to Elaine's house again, the sky was gray and heavy, like it was holding its breath. The hydrangeas out front had begun to wilt, and for a moment I wondered if grief made everything around it fade too. Elaine opened the door before I could knock. She smiled faintly. I thought you might come back. Inside, she handed me a cup of tea the way someone might offer peace, quietly, gently. I have so many questions, I admitted. I know, she said, sitting across from me, and I'll tell you everything I can. So she did. She told me that she and my father had met at a community lecture, something about maritime history, of all things. They talked for hours afterward. He'd told her about losing my mother, about how he couldn't bear the emptiness of the house. I never meant to fall for him, Elaine said softly. But he was kind, broken but kind. He brought me flowers every Sunday, hydrangeas, because he said they reminded him of both of you girls. That nearly undid me. She went on to explain how they'd married quietly 3 years after Mom's death. No ceremony, no family, just the two of them at a courthouse, followed by lunch at a diner. He'd wanted to tell us, but every time he brought it up, Marjorie shut him down. She said you were still seeing a therapist for your grief, Elaine said. that you'd had panic attacks. He didn't want to risk losing you too. I sat there, gripping my teeth so tightly my knuckles went white. I wasn't fragile, I said through my teeth. I was grieving. There's a difference, Elaine nodded sadly. He knew that. Deep down he did. But sometimes love makes people cowardly. Her words lingered in the air, sharp and true. Then I asked the question that had been haunting me. Was he happy? Her smile trembled. He was at peace. That's all he ever wanted, peace. He missed you terribly, though. Every birthday, every holiday, he'd write you letters he never sent. I still have them, I stared at her. Letters? She went to a small chest by the window and pulled out a stack of envelopes tied together with twine. My name, Clara, written in my father's careful handwriting. When she handed them to me, I felt like I was holding pieces of time I was never meant to have. I opened one. Clara, I saw your latest painting in the community paper. The blues remind me of your mother's eyes. I'm proud of you. I wish I could tell you in person, but maybe one day you'll understand why I didn't. My throat tightened. I opened another. Marjorie tells me you're doing better. I hope that's true. I wish you'd visit, but I won't pressure you. I know grief has its own timeline. And another. You'll always be my little girl, no matter what anyone says. By the time I finished reading, the letters were wet with tears. Elaine reached over and touched my hand. He never stopped loving you, Clara. He just didn't know how to bridge the silence between you. That broke something open in me. Not anger this time, but the kind of sorrow that sits too deep for words. That evening, I drove home with the letters in my passenger seat. The rain had started by then, light and steady, like the sky was trying to wash everything clean. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table and read through each letter again. With every line, I felt the bitterness untangle just a little more. I realized that what Marjorie had done, while wrong, came from the same fear that haunted all of us, losing someone we loved. She'd chosen control, Dad had chosen silence, and I had chosen distance. We were all just doing our best to survive the same wound, but survival without truth isn't peace. It's just a quieter kind of pain. The next morning, I called Marjorie. She didn't pick up, so I drove over. She opened the door in her robe, clearly not expecting me. Clara, it's early. I know, I said. But I need to talk. I laid the bundle of letters on her kitchen table. He wrote to me. Elaine kept them. Marjorie stared at them like they were ghosts. You went back to her? Yes, I said simply. And I'm glad I did. She looked down at the letters, her expression crumbling. I didn't know about those. I believe you, I said. But you still made choices that changed everything. You don't get to decide who I get to love or forgive. Her eyes filled with tears. I just wanted to protect you, Clara. I know, I whispered. But you can't protect someone by lying to them. That's not love. She nodded slowly, her tears spilling over. I guess I didn't know how else to keep the family together. For a long moment, we just stood there, two women standing on opposite sides of a truth we both helped bury. Then I reached across the table and slid one of the letters toward her. Read it, I said. He wrote about you, too. She hesitated, then unfolded the letter. As she read, her shoulders began to shake. Tell Marjorie I'm proud of her, even when she thinks I'm not. She carries too much on her shoulders. I hope one day she learns that she doesn't have to. When she finished, she wiped her face with her sleeve. He really wrote that? He really did. Something softened between us then. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close. In the weeks that followed, we both visited Elaine together. It was awkward at first, Marjorie stiff, Elaine polite, but grief, when shared, has a way of sanding down the rough edges. Eventually, we started talking. About Dad, about Mom, about the years we'd all lost to silence. Elaine told stories we'd never heard. How Dad still wore Mom's wedding ring on a chain. How he'd built a small bench by the harbor where he'd go every Sunday to think. One afternoon, the three of us went there together. The bench was still there, weathered, quiet, facing the water. We left a small bouquet of hydrangeas on it. Marjorie took my hand, her grip trembling. I'm sorry, she said again. I know, I whispered. The waves rolled softly against the shore, and for the first time, the ache inside me felt bearable. Maybe peace doesn't come from knowing the whole truth. Maybe it comes from choosing to stop running from it. As the sun began to set, I looked at the horizon and felt something lift. Dad had found peace. And maybe finally so had we. It's been a year since that day by the harbor. The hydrangeas bloom every spring, and I visit the bench often. I sit there with a thermos of coffee, the way Dad used to, and watch the tide shift from blue to gray and back again. Life has found a new rhythm. Not perfect, but peaceful. Marjorie and I talk more now, not out of obligation, but out of something gentler, quieter. Sometimes we argue, yes, but the walls between us have thinned. She even invited Elaine over for dinner last month. The three of us sat around my kitchen table, laughing awkwardly at first, until the laughter became real. It felt strange, like healing sneaking in when no one was looking. I've thought a lot about secrets since then, how they start small, one withheld truth, one unspoken fear, and how easily they grow roots, winding through the years until they strangle everything they were meant to protect. Dad's secret marriage wasn't born out of deceit. It was born out of fear of losing love, fear of repeating pain. But fear, even when wrapped in love, still blinds us, and Marjorie's betrayal wasn't about cruelty. It was about control, the kind that comes from thinking love means protecting someone from what might hurt them. But sometimes, the truth hurts less than the lie that tries to soften it. I've learned that love without honesty isn't safety. It's distance wearing a smile, and forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the pain never happened. It means choosing to stop carrying it like proof of what was lost. Now, when I sit at that bench, I think about the versions of us that never got to say goodbye properly. The daughter who waited for a phone call, the father who kept writing letters he never sent, the sister who carried too much guilt to speak. We were all just trying to love each other the only way we knew how. And maybe that's the truth at the heart of every family story, that love is rarely clean, but it's always worth fighting for. The last letter I read from my father ended with these words: "If you ever read this, Clara, know that I'm proud of the woman you've become. I hope you forgive me, not for what I did, but for what I couldn't say. I think I understand that now. Some things can't be said when people are alive. They need silence, distance, time. But when you finally face them, when you sit with the truth long enough to stop fearing it, that's when love finally becomes real again." So if you're listening to this, I want to ask you something. Would you rather know the whole truth, even if it hurts, or live peacefully inside a lie? Because sometimes, peace built on silence isn't peace at all. It's just the calm before the next wave. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted the secret, or let it rest with the dead? Let me know in the comments below. And if my story reminded you of someone you've lost, or someone you're trying to forgive, hold them close while you still can. Because the truth, when faced with love, is never the enemy. It's the beginning of peace.